The Hoopa Project, Bigfoot Encounters in California by David Paulides. Introduction. Knowledge of our own arrogance is the first step towards true knowledge. Socrates. In 1968, I was 12 years old and indoctrinated into my dad's lifestyle. We spent as much free time as possible walking the woods of Northern California, fishing, sightseeing, and enjoying wildlife. We never went hunting, but my dad's past profession as a police officer prompted him to always carry a gun while on our trips. We spent many summers backpacking into the far reaches of Trinity, Humboldt, Shasta, Lassen, and Modoc country. On past deer hunting trips, my dad and grandfather had explored these areas and knew them well prior to letting me tag along. We had probably hiked into the southern Antelope Creek region of Lassen country 5 times over an 8-year span, but the 6th time was different, very different. It was in August, and the new school year was quickly approaching. The ride into the region was dusty, hot, and extremely dry. I remember that we always passed a California Department of Corrections prison. Somehow, this always stuck out in my mind. We drove through a creek and made our way to a dirt overlook. We parked our car, put our packs on, and started the 2-hour dusty and hot hike down into the creek. There was always anticipation in getting to our fishing spot, as the fishing was always exceptional. In over 20 trips down into the creek, my dad had never seen another person in the area and had never seen any indicators that people had been there. You never wanted to hike out of the valley in the middle of the day due to the heat, snakes, and the lack of water. The hike down into the creek was fairly easy, while the hike out was brutal. We arrived at our camping spot next to the creek, where we always stopped and slept on previous trips. There was a large umbrella of huge trees that kept the creek and the surrounding area cool and refreshing. There was a shallow cutout where the river had gouged a small cave into the hillside where we slept. We started to set out our equipment and put our poles and reels together when we started to smell smoke. Smoke in this area is a very dangerous issue because fire can roar through the valley quickly. We knew that there was nobody in the valley because we were at the only parking location and there wasn't another car. If this wasn't a controlled burn, then the fire could quickly develop and trap us in the valley. My dad told I made a mental note that the creek was just small enough that I could probably cross in certain spots. I also noted that there was no garbage, footprints, or other tracks in the sandbank, or other signs of humans. It was a very serene location, but as we got closer to the smoke, I could tell my dad's mannerisms that he was uncomfortable with what was happening. We worked our way through some large spruce, which immediately opened up to a beach area. The sand was approximately 30 feet square in size. The creek had flowed off several large boulders into a deep pool that was adjacent to the beach. You could see where the creek had washed up a few feet of sand, and you could just see where the sand had changed color because of the moisture content. It was just inside this discoloration zone we saw the fire. It was something I will never forget. The fire was made of 15 to 20 small twigs broken into equal pieces approximately 1 foot long. They were placed on the sand in the shape of a teepee. As we walked up to the fire, my dad got very nervous. He pulled his gun and scanned the surrounding area. He slowly made his way towards the fire while also looking at the sand in the surrounding area. Well, being the son of my father, I was also pretty nervous and was looking at the sand. I immediately noticed how flat the sand was. No ripples, footprints, nothing. The area where the river had changed the color of the sand was dead level. No marks anywhere. The surrounding area was absolutely quiet except for the creek. Eerily quiet. There were no birds chirping, no squirrels running around, no sounds except the creek. It was almost as if a vacuum had sucked up all the noise out of the atmosphere, except for the water running over the boulders. My dad had spent 3 years in the San Francisco Police Department and then transferred to the fire department. He was in the middle of a 30-year career in public service when we made this trip. I think he was half police officer and half arson inspector when we were on that beach. He knelt next to the fire and slowly and methodically pushed the small twigs down looking for the ignition source. He couldn't find anything. We continued to scan the beach for indications of footprints, sled marks, bicycle tracks, ridiculous. Heck, anything, but nothing was visible. My dad put the fire out, kept his gun out, and told me to start walking back towards our gear. After several minutes, we arrived back at our packs. My dad told me that he was extremely uncomfortable staying down in the valley overnight because it was obvious that something or someone else was living in this valley and they wanted to scare us off. They had succeeded, and we were leaving. As we collected our belongings, he continued to look behind us towards the direction of the fire and kept his gun out. This was the first time I had ever seen my dad as nervous or protective as he was at that very minute. His actions made me nervous, but I also knew that this was a rational thinker, and it was best in our interest if we got out of the valley. The sun was lying low on the horizon and casting shadows, making the hike out a lot less brutal than it would have been in the heat of the day. A normal hike from the South Antelope at that time of the day would have taken us 4 hours. We made it in 2. There was a little said between us other than sharing canteens. We got back to the car very exhausted and drove back into Redding. Only when we reached Interstate 5 for the 6-hour drive back to our house did my dad show signs of relaxing. We stopped at an A&W root beer stand in Redding to buy hamburgers. We placed our order and were sitting in the darkness looking back towards Mount Lawson as the moon was casting light on the side of its peak. My dad said that he had been visiting those woods for a large portion of his life, and he had seen hunters, other fishermen, and even dead animals in his travels. He told me that what we had just witnessed was the most peculiar and uncomfortable thing he had witnessed in his entire life. He felt it was obvious that someone, or something, with intelligence started the fire, and that we could assume that the fire was started just as we arrived in the valley, as a message to make us concerned. He explained that we should have seen tracks near the fire, and that there should have been an ignition source. When he couldn't find tracks or an ignition source, we decided we weren't staying there. He admitted that he had no idea who or what made the fire, and that we might never find out. During the ride home, we talked about the variety of animals that were in the forest and how the fire could possibly have been started. This was the first time I ever heard of Bigfoot. My dad said that hunters and fishermen throughout Northern California had seen Bigfoot for years. He described Bigfoot, how it looked, and explicitly stated that Bigfoot had never injured anyone. While he had read stories of Bigfoot doing mischievous things to make visitors leave an area it inhabited, he had never heard of Bigfoot using fire. He did confirm that Bigfoot left human-like tracks that were easily visible, and that the local Native American Indians had stories of Bigfoot going back hundreds of years. He had never told me about this animal, he said, because he never wanted me to be scared, and then apologized for even bringing it up, because he knew that Bigfoot couldn't have made the fire. We arrived home long after midnight. I think I slept until noon the next day, and staggered into the kitchen to hear my parents talking about our journey. My mom staring in disbelief at my dad's story. My dad had called the Department of Corrections facility near the valley and asked if anyone had escaped in a recent past. The DOC stated that they had never had anyone escape that wasn't immediately recaptured, and nobody had left in several months. I still think, though, what happened in that valley that day. While I truly don't believe that Bigfoot lit that fire, I do believe that something intelligent some intelligent being in that area did. The fire was too neatly constructed for it not to be made by something smart. In my years talking to the Hoopa Uroka and Kuroka Native Americans, I did learn a lot about the types of creatures, people, and superstitions that exist in the mountains of Northern California. Maybe our fire starter was a little person, a being that has been described by many Native Americans as small humans that live in caves and underground and come out at night to roam forests of Northern California. The Karuks believes that they're descended from little people. Maybe it was a human who was living off-grid and didn't want us infringing on the good thing it had at the creek. Maybe the incident is even more sinister than I could imagine. Who knows? Second incident. The second incident involving my personal education about Bigfoot occurred much later in life. I was now the father and was with my daughter. It was July 2002, and I was in Whistler, British Columbia, with my ex-wife, son, and daughter for my son's hockey tournament. His team had just won the California State Pee Wee Hockey Championship, and they were invited to Whistler to play in a North American tournament. We were there for 5 days of hockey, which equaled 5 days of hell for my daughter. She was 10 years old at the time and a very patient sister, but a sister looking for some excitement. One of my son's games was completed at 11 a.m., and I agreed to take my daughter on a fishing trip into the mountains surrounding Whistler. She loved fishing. I contacted a local guide, and we met him at his shop. The owner made the introductions to our guide, Curtis Christian. Little did I know at the time, the introduction to Curtis would change my life. Curtis was in his late 20s, tanned, in great shape, and very humble and polite personality. He was a perfect match for my daughter and me. Curtis asked what type of fishing we liked, and how advanced my daughter was with a rod, and what type of fish we liked to catch. We had a short conversation, loaded the equipment in Curtis's truck, and made our way into the mountains. The hills surrounding Whistler are large, rugged, and absolutely beautiful. There are many streams that run down the valleys into the Whistler regions, making several options for fishing. The three of us sat in the front seat of Curtis's truck and talked stories for over 90-minute ride. Curtis told me that he had been coming to Whistler to spend his summers for many years. He said that he loved the wildlife, scenery, and fishing. I am always inquisitive about a person's life and asked Curtis what he did in his winters. He was a coach for the Canadian Olympic team. We were now on a very rough dirt road that took Curtis's 4 wheels drive everything it had to make it up and over some very large boulders. We were following a small creek up a ravine when I asked Curtis if he had ever had any strange outdoor wildlife experiences while guiding. He looked directly in my eyes and then down at my daughter and gave me the type of look questioning whether he could talk in front of my daughter. I said that he could talk freely, as my daughter has been in some of the most remote areas of North America and was very comfortable in the outdoors. Curtis said that the previous summer he was guiding 2 clients for a day of fishing similar to what he was doing with us. The situation was also quite similar, driving up a road adjacent to a small river with a lot of brush covering the bank, probably 15 miles away from anyone or any civilization. They were driving fairly slow when they all saw something walk out in front of them on the side of the road next to the river. It was early the next morning, but the sun was fully up and the visibility was excellent. He told me that they saw a huge, hair-covered animal walking directly in front of them into the middle of the road. It walked on 2 feet, never on 4, and had the posture of walking strut of a normal person, and the face almost of a human being. Curtis was looking in my eyes for my expression or my reaction, but I had none. I was mesmerized. He said that the animal looked back at them and took 2 huge strides and disappeared into the brush and timber on the opposite side of the road. He said he knew that he had just seen Sasquatch. My daughter had heard stories of Bigfoot and was also very interested in the story and wasn't scared. Curtis continued to offer additional details of the sighting until we reached the alpine lake we would be fishing. Curtis is the kind of person who is polite enough to not want to scare my daughter, but certain enough about what he saw that he wasn't looking for my nod of approval or acceptance. My daughter and I used float tubes the entire day to fish in the lake, caught few fish, but had a great father-daughter day. I must admit, I wasn't thinking much about the fish that day, but more about Bigfoot. This Whistler incident prompted me to read everything I could find about Bigfoot. This was just after the Patterson-Gimlin film was re-digitized, and there was still many articles being written about Bigfoot. Between school, sports, work, and lifestyle issues, however, Bigfoot slowly moved to the back of the file cabinet, and I moved forward with my life. It wasn't until my lifestyle became comfortable, money was in the bank, and kids were in school that I found the time to wade into the Bigfoot issue. The following is the story of my California Bigfoot search. Spotlight, Hoopa. David Paulides. Forward. This remarkable work brings us another first in the annals of Bigfoot research. Numerous Bigfoot-related incidents are presented that are the result of first-hand investigations by a former trained police officer and professional investigator. Added to this, a highly qualified, experienced forensic police artist was commissioned to meet Bigfoot sightings witnesses and to prepare detailed sketches of what the witnesses saw. David Paulides recorded his conversations with Bigfoot witnesses in the same way he prepared his reports in police work. The entire book is therefore written in what might be termed police report format, which is very direct and to the point. Particular care is taken to ensure that facts are not misread or misinterpreted. Sentences are short and thoughtfully structured to ensure the reader fully comprehends what is being said. The details, interpretations, and images provided on Bigfoot encounters in this book go far beyond normal reporting. David Paulides brings to the table over 30 years of professional investigative experience, and we are therefore provided with what can only be termed as the best Bigfoot reports ever written. Christopher L. Murphy, author, Meet the Sasquatch.